Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Elise. I hope you're all doing so good today. We are kicking off kind of a review slash vlog. There's not going to be any b-roll in this. I'm just going to be talking about this book, but I will do several check-ins along the way. So we are doing a nonfiction November type of review, and we will be reviewing two books that are connected to one another. So the first one is James Baldwin's The Fire Next Time. This is a two-part essay collection. So there's two essays in which they're writing about, racism, the legacy of racism. This is all around the centennial anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation is when James Baldwin is writing this. So I think it's talking about, the civil rights movement as it has been thus far, and then the future of the civil rights movement and maybe how things have and haven't changed. So very interested to get to this. I'm excited. What I'm gonna do is I'll read the first essay, which is actually very short. I think it's only 10 pages, and then give you an update. And then I will read the last essay, which is 80 pages, and give you a full review of the book. Then I will be reading The Fire This Time, and this is an essay anthology that's edited by Jesmyn Ward. This is published by Scribner, and this is published by Vintage Books. Yeah, this one is sort of a follow-up to this book, and it's a collection of authors who are writing either essays or poems on race in America. It's comparing, this book that was written 50 years previous to this book, and again, what has changed and what has not changed. I think this is going to have a lot of people wrestling about the past, present, and future of the Black experience in America. So very excited to read these in tandem. I'm reading them together because I think that this one will have more impact if I've freshly read this one. So yeah, excited to read these together and review them with you and have a good, informative nonfiction November. So without further ado, I will go ahead and read the first essay in this one and get back to you on what it was like. Doing a quick check-in because I just finished the first letter, I should say, not essay. So I didn't say this previously, but it's written in a letter format that James is writing to his nephew, who's also named James. And that's kind of the format in which he's letting these thoughts flow that he's having. So he's very much writing to someone. And the first essay was already so good, and it was only 10 pages, which is insane. First one, as I said, he's writing to James and trying to make James understand that he's going to be made to feel inferior in a lot of ways, and the importance of resisting against that, and also the importance of not internalizing that it's his issue to deal with, that it's really, white people's issue to deal with, and to come to terms with the way that they're treating people, and to kind of see their true selves and actions for what they are. There's so many good lines in this, I could read a lot, but there are a few that I'm gonna read from. So in the context of what I just said, it says, "Please try to be clear, dear James, through the storm which rages about your youthful head today, about the reality which lies behind the words acceptance and integration. There is no reason for you to try to become like white people, and there is no basis whatever for their impertinent assumption that they must accept you. The really terribly odd thing, old buddy, is that you must accept them." Yeah, so powerful. And then I also want to read near the end of the first section, and it says, "You know and I know that the country is celebrating 100 years of freedom, 100 years too soon. We cannot be free until they are free. God bless you, James, and Godspeed, your Uncle James." Already very good. I can't wait to keep reading. So promising start so far. And yeah, the prose is beautiful, which I could have expected because it's James Baldwin. So I'm very excited to continue reading, and I will let you know how the last letter goes. The last letter is the rest of the book. So I think it's about 80 or maybe even 90 pages. So I will check back in when I have finished and see how it went overall. Bye. Okay, I have finished reading The Fire Next Time and ready to give a review. So after I checked in with you last time, I had read the first letter to his nephew, and that was very short, and the last section is the rest of the book, and that is very much more like an essay. So the first section is a letter and very personalized. The last one is essentially just an essay that he's writing to, you know, the masses about how he currently sees the racial tensions in America and what he sees as the potential solutions for that. So I will try and quickly go over some of the ideas that he's positing here, and then I'll read you some quotes at the end. So it starts off basically talking about Christianity, which I was not expecting it to do. So he was a pastor at one point in his life when he was younger, and he's reflecting upon that time and sort of about the false hope that Christianity presented to him at that time, and the vast history of Christianity and the Christian church mistreating Black people, and sort of having a reckoning about that. And then he shifts into talking about the Nation of Islam, sort of the rise that was happening at that time in America, because it sort of presented this hope of Black people being in power, and that was sort of like the prophecy of them being in power, and how that would be very enticing to a lot of people to believe. So he's reflecting sort of both on both of those religious movements at the time, and ultimately presenting them as false hopes in a way to be able to change what's going on in America. And it very much has the sentiment of now what we would say is thoughts and prayers. So saying that regardless of what your spirituality is, we can't ultimately depend on a higher power to save us, that we need to make tangible changes now in order to fix this. It's not going to be fixed for us, basically. Yeah, so he starts off talking about that, and then he shifts into what he sees as ultimately some of the solutions or how we might get there. And the big one of the main ones, is that he feels that white Americans need to have a reckoning with themselves of the ways that they have treated people in the past, disproportionately people of color and Black people specifically in this, to come to terms with all of the harm that they have done and all of the horrible things that they have perpetuated and what they have allowed themselves to do, and sort of holding a mirror up to themselves to see who they truly are, whether you're complicit in that or actively perpetuating it, which all of those are decisions that you're accountable to. So that is the first thing. And then the second thing is really about Black people and white people and all American people coming together, and realizing that we can't have this shared vision or goal of truly having what we want as a society, or maybe as a melting pot society, if we don't come together. It takes all of us in order for that dream to be achievable. And that can only happen after white people sort of have their reckoning, right? So I want to make sure I'm stating that one can't happen without the other. So I want to read a quote from the end of the book. It's the very end. Not a spoiler in any sense because it's nonfiction, but this also ties in the title of the book, and it does it in a really great way, but it summarizes some of what he's saying. So he says, "Everything now we must assume is in our hands. We have no right to assume otherwise. If we, and now I mean the relatively conscious whites and the relatively conscious Blacks, who must, like lovers, insist on or create the consciousness of the others, do not falter in our duty now, we may be able, handful that we are, to end this racial nightmare and achieve our country and change the history of the world. If we do not now dare everything, the fulfillment of that prophecy recreated from the Bible in a song by a slave is upon us. God gave Noah the rainbow sign, no more water, the fire next time." So good, such a good way to end it. and is sort of a warning to say we don't get chances forever. This is going to come to a head and will continue to come to a head in many different ways if we don't do something about this. So yeah, this was really great. I very much enjoyed reading it. The writing was spectacular. And yeah, it is a little dated, I will say, of course. But I'm very intrigued to now get to the fire this time and see it in more of a current context. This was published in 2016, so it's already going to be a little bit dated, but very excited to see like a 21st century take on what's happening now in regards to race in America. And we'll check in once I have more to report. Bye. Hello, welcome back. So for you, it's been like a second. For me, it's been 2 weeks. So I haven't updated in a while. I have been to both Mexico and Canada since the last time you saw me. And I've recently gotten back to Seattle. So I'm telling you that now because I want you to know the headspace I'm in going into this book, as opposed to the one I was in reading James Baldwin, might be different. So take whatever I'm saying with a grain of salt. I am sleep deprived from my travels. I came back to an 11-hour work day and my car not starting. So it's been a crazy journey. We've been on a ride. But I have started this book. So I'm going to give you a quick little like synopsis of the introduction and then we'll go from there. I introduced this really briefly in the beginning, but the beginning of this starts with 2 introductions, I would say. The first one is a poem by Jericho Brown called The Tradition. And I actually own the poetry collection that is titled The Tradition. So it's the titular poem in it, but I have not read that poem collection. So it starts with that poem, and in it, it references some of the men who have been killed by police in the US, Black men specifically, and that is sort of setting up the framing of the book. And that immediately goes into Jesmyn Ward's introduction, who is the editor of this essay and poetry collection. And they talk about why they wanted to put this collection together on the 50th anniversary of the Baldwin essay collection. There's kind of 2 reasons that they present. One is just like how meaningful it was to read James Baldwin's collection, The Fire Next Time, when they were younger. Particularly the parts where it talks about like the fact that you deserve to love yourself, and like other people will try to make you feel inferior, and it's important for you to not believe that, and to take pride in who you are. So that was very meaningful for them when they were young, being able to read that representation. And then also the second part is the death of Trayvon Martin. So they cite that as a turning point in their life in which all of the systemic racism really like hit a head for them, and they realized that they saw Trayvon Martin as a boy, which he was, whereas the rest of the world saw him as something, you know, scary or other when he was a child. Those are the 2 reasons they give. They also talk about the format of this book, which I do want to tell you about really briefly. So this is sectioned off in 3 parts, and it's sectioned off in Legacy, Reckoning, and Jubilee, I believe are the names of the 3 sections. And that's loosely supposed to correlate with past, present, and future. That is a little bit of the structure of this. And she even mentions the future section, or the Jubilee section, is very short. So only 3 people submitted work that had anything to do with the future, and how that all is kind of speaking to the entwined nature of things, like all past, present, future is all interconnected with one another. And that people are still really grappling with everything that's happening, and sometimes it can be difficult to look ahead. I have actually started the past section, the legacy section. So I'm going to check in with you once I finish that section and give kind of my overarching thoughts on some of the themes that were coming out of that, and kind of break it down section by section and give you updates that way. So hopefully you enjoy that. So I will check back in a little bit. Bye. All right, we are here to give an update on the first section of The Fire This Time. So like I said earlier, it's labeled legacy and it has to do with the past. So all the works in this collection that has to do with the past. And there is so much good stuff in it, like so much. I had a hard time deciding if there were overarching themes or ideas and stuff like that. And everything does pretty much stand on its own. I wouldn't say it's trying to frame it in any other type of way other than the past or legacy. But yeah, I think there were so many, like, as the kids say, bangers up in here. So I want to go over some of my favorite ones, and then talk a little bit about some of what went on. So this has a lot of information about tokenism. It has a lot of information about the resilience that comes with the legacy of Black people in America. It talks a lot about revisionist history, and it talks about white rage and how that is something that's destroying America in general. So many good things in here. I have to say my three favorite essays in this section were, I think, the last three, if I'm remembering correctly. One by Honoré Fanon Jeffers, which is about revisionist history, and it's about Phyllis Wheatley's husband. And Phyllis Wheatley was like a genius mind in her time, and very well educated, but died young. And a lot of the narrative at the time, or I should say a lot of the narrative by one white woman who took it upon herself to write the history, is basically that it's his fault that she, fell from grace and died before her time. And he was just like a deadbeat, and a lot of like stereotypical narratives that get placed on Black men, and how, as Honoré Fanon Jeffers has done research, has discovered that that's not true. So that one was very interesting. I loved the one on white rage, which is by Carol Anderson, and I have a quote to share from this one, and it says, "Protests and looting naturally capture attention, but the real rage smolders in the meetings where officials redraw precincts to dilute African American voting strength or seek to slash the government payrolls that have long served the sources of Black employment. It goes virtually unnoticed, however, because white rage doesn't have to take to the streets and face rubber bullets to be heard. Instead, white rage carries an aura of respectability and has access to the courts, police, legislatures, and governors who cast its efforts as noble, though they are actually driven by the most ignoble motivations." So good, so good. And that's the very opening of that essay, and I just thought that was brilliant. So yeah, this had so many great things going for it. It really covered like a vast array of history. The first one talks a little bit about James Baldwin and his importance to the movement, and how that is both a gift and also a sign of the lack of representation of Black artists at the time and Black writers. So even if you didn't love Baldwin, right, like you have to hold him up as this bastion of literature because of what he represented. So yeah, lots of good things. I'm gonna move on to the next section, which is the present section, titled The Reckoning. So I will let you know what that is like when I get to it. Hello, I am here to give you a quick update on The Fire This Time. So I have finished the middle section, which is called Reckoning, and is loosely about the present time. And this is a pretty big section. I think it's the biggest section in the book, and I really loved it. I loved it so much. Before I get into some of the actual essay topics and things like that, I think it is interesting to note that one, there are more entries in this collection by women than there are men. But this section, so the first section was all women. There weren't any by men in that section. And then this section is dominated by men. Interesting thing to note. And I think in the next section, there's only one by a man. So yeah, just interesting that the present section is kind of dominated by men and they're not so much in the other sections. So food for thought on why that might be. But this was so good. I enjoyed this section more than the first one, I think. And I'm sure part of that is like, it's in the present time, right? So maybe I resonate with it a little bit more. But that's an interesting thing about the first section is like, I think a lot of the people were talking about how the past is indicative and reflective and meaningful to our present. And that's an important reminder. Some of the essays in here that I loved, well, the first one is about Rachel Dolezal, and it was so good. That might be my favorite essay in this. But yeah, I really enjoyed that one. Another essay I loved was by Mitchell S. Jackson, whom I just love in general. He writes an essay about all the like composite fathers in his life, so like father figures that he has, and it breaks it up by each man and an example of why he considers them composite pop, so to speak. The other one that I really enjoyed was by, let me catch the name, it was by Emily Roboteau, and this one had images, and this one is framed in this series of murals that was done in New York on like knowing your rights. It's called the Know Your Rights murals, and she goes around and photographs each of them and includes those photographs here, and then like talks about each mural and kind of what that represents as far as the movement. So that one was really interesting. And also the one by Claudia Rankin, whom I also love, is about the injustices perpetrated by police on Black bodies and the importance of witnessing those bodies and like the pain that comes with that, and compassion for why people don't want that, but also this way in which they become evidence in some respects, and what that means as far as the like civil rights movement that we have today. All of those are my 4 favorites. I really enjoyed them, but every essay in this section was great. I highly recommend, even if you don't have time to like pick up the whole thing, I highly recommend those essays. So yeah, a theme throughout this section was definitely police brutality and police murdering Black people. That was a heavy theme throughout the essays in here, which makes sense if that's encompassing kind of like present race relations in America. That is a large dominating point of the narrative. So yeah, that was the overarching theme in this one. And the next section, Jubilee, which is the future, is very short. So I will read that section and get back to you on what that is like. I have finished this, The Fire This Time, and read the future section or Jubilee section of the book. And this is by far the shortest section. There were only 3 works, and I think 1 was a poem and 2 were essays. My favorite by far was the last one, which I get why they saved it till last. And it's the one by Edwidge Danticat, who I know is beloved, but I've never read anything by her before, and I totally understand, you know, why she's lauded as such an amazing writer, because this essay was amazing. It's all about whether or not Black people in the US would qualify for refugee status if they were trying to go to another country because they're being disproportionately murdered by their police, don't have, you know, discriminatory laws made against them. So like all these factors that would technically qualify as a refugee status. So it was very interesting to read. It gave you a lot to think about. So I very much enjoyed that. yeah, overall, I thought this collection was great. While, of course, with any collection, there are some that I liked better than others, I think it was a cohesive collection as a whole, and it did a really good job of getting a lot of different parts of what racial tension in America looks like today. So these two books were both fantastic. It was a joy to get to read both of these, and I am glad I read them relatively close together. It made this one have a little bit more impact for me. So I highly recommend, if you're wanting to see like a good overview of what racial tensions have looked like in America for the last, 100 years, this is a really good way to get some perspective of that, and I enjoyed that scope of it as well. So yeah, highly recommend, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye.